Hi, everyone. I am David Lipton from The Reckoning, July 4th, 2030. This podcast is about how U.S. presidents lost the Ukraine to Russian aggression, undermined the independence of all European countries west of Russia to the Atlantic coast, and extinguished all U.S. influence on the European continent. It is a sad tale of how we abandoned the empire of liberty because we as a nation fluctuated between chronic indignation and the cosmic feeling that we can solve all nations' problems. The setting, as in earlier podcasts, is Long Island in New York. It is the summer of 2030. My granddaughter, Alicia, and I are walking the shore, gazing out at the Chinese ships in the Atlantic Ocean. As before, we are time traveling between 2030 and today. Alicia asked me, where are our naval ships and why has all the communication with European countries been cut off? Alicia, do you remember our earlier conversations on our national pastime of indulging and then ignoring problems abroad? Sure, she said. What of it? Let me remind you of the strategic needs of our country. The fundamental strategic interest of the United States has remained the same since 1945. The U.S. is in effect a continental island with the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans as barriers and operates as all maritime empires have done since time immemorial. We must always keep our enemies as far away from our shores as possible. Otherwise, the fight will quickly descend upon us in our homeland. Unfortunately, those two ocean barriers made us complacent and gave us the illusion that we always had an option to bow out of world affairs when we thought it suited us. History showed us differently. As applied to U.S. circumstances, our maritime strategy requires that our nation pursues consistently the following policies. Look at this world map that we're looking at right now to get a clear image of how the three pillars of strategic U.S. interests would apply to us and our world today. 1. Maintenance of unobstructed sea lanes to connect and trade with the rest of the world, Canada and Mexico excepted. 2. Prevention of any combination of external forces, be they nations or more loosely directed organizations, which might weaken U.S. commercial and political bonds and alliances beyond our shores. 3. The U.S. must ensure it offers its friends and enemies abroad a greater incentive to deal with the U.S. rather than each other. Otherwise, U.S. influence and its ability to act abroad will decline. Alicia, I would like to show you now two world maps, and I've got them right here with me, and to explain how in 25 years the tables were turned by the Chinese against the United States. These maps were published in 2025 in a financial magazine that I found in my attic called Barron's. It, in its day, was a very influential magazine read by the financial elite of the U.S. Keep in mind that trade flows are an important indicator of future international political clout. As you can see, between 2000 and 2024, international trade flows and electronic warfare leapt right over the oceans, protecting us. These two world maps show the extent of the trade competition between the U.S., in blue, and China, in red. In 2000, the U.S. was the major trading partner of most of the countries around the globe. By 2024, the U.S. trading predominance in the Eastern Hemisphere, those countries on the other side of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, gave way to China, shown in red, the only exception being Western Europe and the Western Hemisphere. U.S. predominance shrank also in Central and Latin America. The red had spread to our hemisphere. Why did this happen? Simply put, we ignored the three pillars of our nation's strategic interests. We and our leaders looked at personalities and shifting domestic political needs rather than at the overall pattern of U.S. behavior. We seemed to fluctuate as a nation between chronic indignation and the cosmic feeling that we could solve everybody's problem. Because we treated foreign affairs as the plaything of ever-shifting U.S. politics and ignored our strategic needs, Russia, and more importantly, China, stole a march on us by the Russians exploiting the U.S.'s unreliability and divided us from our European allies, while China leapt over the oceans through trade and electronic means. That's why those Chinese naval ships are patrolling up and down our Atlantic and Pacific coasts. You might also check your cell phone to see if there are any Chinese-manufactured chips or software that you regularly use to access your favorite apps. In fact, there may even be Chinese apps. You may recall that sometime back in 2024, the U.S. began spending more on the interest payments of our national debt than on our military, and continued to do so. You may also know that most of our national budget is devoted to Social Security payments, Medicare, Medicaid, and social support for poor people. All good causes. First question. In 2000, which country's Navy was the guarantor of the safety of those sea lanes and the bodies of water? You guessed it, it was the USA. Do you remember that by 2028, the U.S. Navy was pulled back to our own shores? Do you remember that? Yes, I do. Now, Alicia, take a second look at those ships out there. Those Chinese ships are there because 30 years ago, we were complacent and dropped the ball. We failed to recognize that hemispheric defense across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans starts thousands of miles from our shores. Second question. Did we have the determination and courage to fight for our beliefs at home and abroad, and to keep our allies to do the same? Look at those ships out there, and you know the answer. We did not. That is what our withdrawal from NATO and cutting loose from Ukraine cost us. Okay, Alicia, I can see that you're getting the picture now. Oh, Grandpa, you bet I am. The eyes of the world were on us. It was all about our ability to project our power abroad in a consistent manner so that our friends and enemies knew exactly where we stood, what we wanted, and if we were still willing to hold the line beyond our shores. We convinced ourselves, and it appears many U.S. presidents had convinced themselves over the years, that U.S. restraint was a virtue and that somehow we could convince our enemies like Russia and China and Iran to see the world on our terms rather than theirs. Our friends and enemies drew another conclusion, that we were getting weaker, less willing, and less able to sustain our extended military commitments abroad. And that's how it turned out. So let's answer the question of why we should care, or should have cared more, about what was happening out there in the Eastern Hemisphere. Well, those places were the outer boundaries of our empire of liberty, also known as the Western world. Our enemies abroad knew this and saw the tide as running in their favor. Just because we were and remain thousands of miles removed from those places does not mean we should be indifferent to the events that occur out there. Our strategic interests required that we not only make our presence felt, but that we hold the line out there in the Eastern Hemisphere, in the Ukraine, the Middle East, the South China Sea, and the Western Pacific, from Midway to Japan, and then up to South Korea, and then down to Australia. We didn't do any of that. Now we are pressed back on our own shores. How do you feel about that, Alicia? She did not answer my question. She remained silent, gazing out at the Chinese ship. I continued and asked her if she knew of Henry Kissinger, who was one of our most effective practitioners of foreign policy. She did not. So I told her what he said many years ago, quote, "We must have the ability and determination to act alone or with a regional grouping of powers if our strategic interests so dictate." We did not follow that sage advice. Unfortunately, starting in 2000, the American people and their president showed that they were fickle, unreliable, and neglected our strategic interests. That is why the map today is mostly painted red and not blue. That is why those Chinese ships are right in front of our eyes. You can access my ideas and thoughts by visiting Amazon.com and search for The Reckoning, July 4th, 2030. Several days after this podcast, I will upload on this YouTube channel an AI-generated conversation to engage you further on how we let slip our empire of liberty. Do not forget to listen in to this engaging and provocative conversation. Thank you.